Government's flagship economic growth project, the 2030 National Development Plan, has come under scrutiny. The plan had set a target of reducing unemployment by 14% by 2020 and 6% by 2030. But with the rise of unemployment and the poor performance of industries such as manufacturing due to COVID-19, there are concerns that the COVID-19 pandemic has put the 2030 goals of the NDP in jeopardy. Miriam Altman, who is a commissioner at the National Planning Commission, joins us now to talk about this. Miriam, good evening, and thank you so much for your time. This was certainly, a blueprint. When it was, drawn up, it was presented as a blueprint towards inclusive economy, but it doesn't look like we are still on track towards Vision 2030.
No, we're not on track. And, we put out a report. We've been doing work over the past period of years and working with stakeholders in government around critical issues like infrastructure, state-owned enterprises, education, digital readiness, these kinds of areas. So we put out a report on Thursday, which gives a final review for this term of the commission in relation to where we are. And, you don't need the National Planning Commission to tell you that we're behind. We know that. It's obvious. And the economy was shrinking before COVID. Employment was falling before COVID. It's very well known. What needs to be better understood is why that is. And the most important part of the report is really a focus on leadership and institutions and how we rebuild capacity. I think one of the critical messages is that, which we know well, is that, in state capture, one of the critical features of it was that state capacity was dramatically undermined as a strategy of state capture, which doesn't always happen. Not every country that has a lot of corruption destroys institutions. They still deliver and they steal. In South Africa, it had a particular characteristic that it undermined the ability to deliver. So this is why we, in an economic report, identify the critical locations in government, particularly, and state institutions, and the type of partnerships that are needed to start getting some momentum and get out of this kind of stuck situation that we're in.
And when one, latches on to what you've just said around, building capacity when it comes to leadership, one would then say, given what, we have been seeing, particularly as you talk about issues around state capture, others have argued that we do appear to have what they call a leadership deficit. So how do we begin to build this capacity then to ensure that we meet these ambitious goals of the National Development Plan?
Well, the biggest differentiator of this report, people won't be shocked by what is found in terms of the progress we've made, although we hope that it does give useful information and insight in that regard. The real differentiator in this report is that it focuses on the locations, the most important locations where the rebuilding of leadership capacity, accountability is needed. So as an example, in the budget process, in the rebuilding of revenue services, in the rebuilding of the boards and executive management of the top infrastructure state-owned enterprises, in the ability to procure and oversee infrastructure, state infrastructure spending, accountability and the approach to managing education institutions, the appointment of school principals, and all of this. I'm just giving some examples. But it's this type of granular, concrete approach which says the most important locations that we need to focus on right now, and the way the rules of the game are supposed to work right now, are as follows. So in fact, in most 90% of this paper, it's not even saying you need a new rule or a new policy. It's saying, so let's implement it.
And I do think that implementation has really been, one of those things that, in fact, that nagging word that, has been coming up time and time again, because we do have these amazing policies, but implementation becomes difficult. And I mean, when you look at a time that we are speaking at right now, someone who was also quite passionate about the National Development Plan, and if I can read about, Minister Jackson Mthembu and how he would describe it, he called it the country's lodestar for inclusive prosperity. But certainly, when you look at where we are finding ourselves, coupled with COVID-19, realistically speaking, when are we going to be able to realize the ambitious goals that were put in this blueprint?
Well, you know, the first thing to say is that we mustn't abandon them. You know, we have a constitution for a reason. We came out of apartheid, deep marginalization. We have such high unemployment. We have a country that is the most unequal in the world. If you stack all of them across, you'll find that South Africa is the most unequal in the world and very deep poverty, particularly for middle-income country. You don't change the targets. It may be that we don't make it for 2030, but the idea, we mustn't be cynical about the idea of wanting to have full employment. It is absolutely not pie in the sky to want to see dramatic falls in poverty, dramatic improvements in employment, and dramatic improvements in inclusion. What we do in this paper is we show you countries that, you know, have had equal challenges to what we have. I often refer to Vietnam. You know, they were at war for 20 years, 1 million people died, North and South pulled apart, and actually is rated amongst one of the most corrupt in the world, and yet progressing with a much higher human development level than we have, including internet penetration in the home. So, you know, it is physically possible to do astounding things and make this kind of progress. And we need to stay committed to that. You don't change the goals. What you do is you up your game to make sure that you get there.
And upping the game means then monitoring as well, because monitoring and evaluation of where we are also becomes critical.
Yeah. And so what we're trying to do with this report is, it is a complex thing as to why we are where we are and why we're not making progress. I mean, it feels like it's complex. What we hope is that this report will make it real, you know, that the things that need to happen right now actually are within our power to do. And it requires government and civil society to come together. It requires strong civil society voice from business, labor, communities to stand up. And I hope that the areas that we identify empower civil society to do that. And, you know, government, of course, but I hope that it also empowers civil society to have stronger voice. Now, the thing in terms of the targets, I should just say, some of the targets like employment are cumulative. They take a while to achieve. So when you miss, you're supposed to be getting year-on-year improvement in a goal like that to get to where we need to go. But there are other kinds of targets, like we say 30%, investment should account for 30% of GDP, and the state should be spending 10% of GDP on infrastructure, right? Now that is a now goal. That is not a 2030 goal. That is a goal that has to happen now, and it grows with GDP, and everything else is dependent on it happening. So what we do also is we separate out, like the leadership issues, for example. If you hear somebody saying, we will get the boards of the SOE sorted by 2024, for argument's sake, it's too late. What you need to say is, we will do it in 2021, because everything else, you know, the boards, the executive leadership of municipalities, of these big infrastructure SOEs, et cetera, everything else depends on that leadership being in place. So that's not something that you delay for a few years. That needs to happen now. So you also have to separate out these targets. So what we do also in these recommendations, we don't necessarily put, excuse me, that wasn't COVID, I hope.
It's okay.
We don't necessarily put, you know, years on each thing. We are engaging with the presidency right now around the 5-year plan, around that kind of timing. So we're meeting regularly now that the paper came out in December. We've been meeting regularly about the 5-year plan. Excuse me, I'll just have some water so I don't cough again.
No worries.
I don't want to scare your viewers. So there are different kinds of targets as well, some of which have to happen now. Excuse me. And some that take time, like employment, is something where you've got to do the investment now, so that we start seeing progress happening in those top and in the most important targets like poverty and employment that do take time to achieve.
And
I hope what the report.
Pardon, you can continue. You can continue, Miriam.
Well, I hope what the report does is, I hope that it gives concrete, specific, non-jargon doables, that it helps society to know what needs to happen, what they should be seeing around them, what they should be participating in, and the state clarity on how to prioritize better so we get a little bit closer to getting on track to what the NDP was envisaging. We hope that these kinds of recommendations, they were very carefully chosen. They were all facilitated before they were put into this report. We're not doing this academic thing where we put out a report and then we talk. There was 3 or 4 years of engagement around these proposals, the discussions, the way that this comes together. This is the culmination of a process which we hope will then go into new rounds of debate and discussion and hopefully action.
And Miriam, you talk about, not making sure, in fact, making sure that there's no jargon, because certainly sometimes when you speak above people's heads, they don't understand what you mean. But, when we look at investment and how important it is going to be and how growing the economy is going to be in order for us to meet these ambitious goals, I can't, help but wonder how important is sustainable energy, going to be, because the energy supply that we have been seeing lately is really, sporadic, and it's not even only lately, but we've been seeing it throughout the years. And that, of course, does have an impact when it comes to businesses. It does have an impact when it comes to investment. It does also have an impact when it comes to how people view South Africa. Then it makes it difficult to even reach this fiscal sustainability that we are then hoping for.
Yeah, and that's a two-pronged thing. It's partly the energy availability, and then the SOEs are bringing the finances down of the country. Now, we did an enormous amount of work over the past period of years on infrastructure and on state-owned enterprise delivery, because in many of these spaces, it's energy, it's transport, it's bulk water. I'm sorry, I don't know why I'm coughing now. I only started coughing when I got on the show. Telecommunications, we focused heavily on infrastructure delivery, and much of which happens through state-owned enterprises. Now, energy is an absolutely foundational deliverable. There's no doubt about it. So we also, by the way, and we should, I would just like to let your viewers know that we have a top energy expert amongst us who's based at CSIR, and he led a process and produced an excellent paper about what needs to happen in the energy space, just to say. So, for any of your viewers who are interested, it's all available on our website. So it's all publicly available. Now, just to take an example of the kind of thing that would come out of a report like this. Number one, the board of Eskom is meant to be a new board. The terms are meant to be ending in 3 years. So it's meant to end in 2021, this year. So we should be seeing the appointment of a new Eskom board. Is that board being appointed according to sort of King 4 type of principles? Are we seeing the CEO, Andre de Ruyter, is he being given a chance to round out his executive management team? Is it a stable leadership? Because we see in the SOEs that the leadership changes almost every year. The chairman of the boards and the CEO has changed every year over the past 10 years or more. You can't run a spaza shop that way. So is he stable? Whatever the issues are going to be, but is he given the chance to stay there for a while, round out his executive management? He has a goal of setting up the independent procurement office, which he would like to have done, separated out by the end of this year, and legally separate by the end of 2022. That would be a game changer, because what that would do is it would mean that you have an independent buying office that is not within Eskom, and therefore not competing. Because what happens is, I am sorry.
It's okay.
If you are in a company and you're supposed to be encouraging competition against yourself, you may have an enlightened CEO for a while who's willing to go with it, but your fiduciary duty is always towards your company. Now, I was the head of strategy at Telecom when we separated. It is so funny that I'm coughing now. I was head of strategy at Telecom. I came in with Sipho Maseko in 2013. One of the first things we did was separate the company, retail and wholesale. And the whole point is, you've got to have the right incentives and you've got to have competition. And particularly, you can't just have one monopoly buyer of energy. We have to have competition. So if I've just given an example of the kinds of things that are in the report around energy. So you can say we need to procure energy, but the problem is not knowing that we need to do that. Of course we need to, right? The question we asked all our research is what goes wrong? We're all agreed we need more energy. There's money towards it, et cetera. What goes wrong? So what our researchers did is they all focused on the institutional questions that are holding us back, because that's what we're not digging into enough. We're not having enough of a national conversation about those particular issues of what needs to be done, as however mundane and boring they might be. We think those are the binding constraints. So in the respective energy, the issues are the quality of the board and the way it gets appointed this year, whether the CEO stays in place. You've got a good CEO now. Will he stay in place? Will he be able to form a strong executive management that is able to operate without excessive political interference? And will that independent buying office be established forthwith? Those would be the markers of what you should be, analysts or whoever's watching the energy space. That is an example of a short list that we're saying, you can say you want more energy, but this is what we need to focus on. This is what we need to be watching, and not just government. Civil society's got to be watching it. So I'm hoping that this will empower people to know what they should be looking for and monitoring. It's not just for government to monitor, but for civil society to be asking, what happened with that board? Why is Andre out of his job? I'm not saying I want him out of his job, but if it happened, it's been happening a lot. To not allow that to happen, just to start, to be vigilant.
All right. Thank you so much for your time. Certainly, it does look like a lot needs to be done to ensure that we stick to these particular goals. And as you say, not to be disheartened, but certainly it does look like government needs to do a lot more to ensure implementation when it comes to this particular point. That was Commissioner at the National Planning Commission, Miriam Altman.